Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi man wala wa ba'd. We're going to continue today with our series, the Eyes On series, in which every month we focus on a separate area of the Muslim world where there's been struggle and there's been issues, and we're going to talk about those issues in some brief detail, inshallah. And we're going to discuss today Myanmar, also known as Burma, and what's happening there to the Rohingya. We're going to start with just an overview and a brief history of Burma, of Myanmar, and what has occurred with the Rohingya there. Now, the Rohingya are a predominantly Muslim ethnic minority who live mostly in the Arakan or the Rakhine state in Buddhist majority Myanmar, previously known as Burma under colonization. Myanmar is a country in northwest Southeast Asia and is the largest country by area in mainland Southeast Asia. Myanmar is bordered by India and Bangladesh in the northwest, and China in the northeast, Laos and Thailand in the east and the southeast, and the Andaman Sea and the Bay of Bengal to the south and the southwest. The population of Myanmar is approximately 55 million people, and according to the official government figures, around 4.3% of the population is Muslim. However, the real numbers may be closer to around 10%, possibly higher. The Myanmar government accuses the Rohingya of being illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. The Rohingya say that they've lived in Myanmar for centuries, and some historians have traced the origins of the Rohingya back to the 8th century. They lived in an independent kingdom in Arakan, what is today known as the Rakhine state. Islam made its way to the region of Rakhine and Myanmar through Muslim Arab traders who traveled to the region between the 9th and the 14th century. And aside from trade, some of the traders settled in the region and intermarried with the people who were there. In 1784, the independent kingdom of Arakan was conquered by a Burman king known as Budao Paya. This led to hundreds of thousands of refugees to flee the Burmese army into Bengal. Hiram Cox, a British diplomat, was sent on behalf of the British Crown and the East India Company to deal with the issue, as the area of Bengal was colonized by the British. The town of Cox's Bazar, where many Rohingya fled, is actually named after this individual, Hiram Cox. Cox's mission was to maximize tax collection by settling the Rohingya refugees and others on areas of fertile land and to create markets for trading. In 1824, after a series of wars, the British began to colonize Burma. They decided to run it as a province of British India. And the British encouraged migrant labor from what is now known as Bangladesh and India into Arakan so that they had more labor available for rice cultivation and infrastructure. The British saw this migration as internal, but many Burmese didn't. During the Second World War, Japan invaded Burma. At first, Burmese nationalists supported Japan, and the Rohingya supported Britain because the British had promised to give Arakan autonomy by declaring what they would call a Muslim national area. As the British retreated and the Japanese advanced, the Rohingya were targeted and displaced by the Burmese. They believed that the Rohingya had unfairly benefited from British rule. By 1945, the British finally drove away the Burmese with the help of both Burmese nationalists and Rohingya fighters. As a reward, the British appointed Rohingya to main posts in the local government. After the war, many Rohingya felt betrayed that the British didn't come through on their promise for a separate Muslim state. In 1948, Burma won independence from Britain, and at the time, many of the Rohingya wanted Arakan to join East Pakistan, which eventually became Bangladesh. The new government vetoed this. The Burmese government vetoed this, and they claimed that the Rohingya were actually illegal migrants. This caused a lot of tensions to grow between the government and the Rohingya. The government imposed restrictions on movements for the Rohingya, and they even refused the Rohingya to be settled in villages that they had been driven out from during the World War II. Most Rohingya who had fled in 1942 to what was then India and East Pakistan weren't allowed to come back to Arakan. They had their land and their property confiscated, and the Rohingya were ostracized and marginalized. Rohingya Muslims were removed from government posts and replaced with Rakhine Buddhists. Not accepting this marginalization, some Rohingya took up arms. Local mujahideen gathered to fight against the Burmese government. In 1948, mujahideen forces managed to effectively gain control of northern Arakan. In the early 1950s, however, the government moved to crush these mujahideen groups and the rebellion died down. However, until 1960, intermittent mujahideen attacks continued before finally dying down for a large portion of time. In 1962, there was a coup, and Burma became a military dictatorship under General Ne Win's Burma Socialist Program Party. They were even harsher against the Rohingya and dissolved all of their social and political organizations that they had previously. In 1977, things got much worse for the Rohingya. The government implemented what was known as Operation Nagamin, or Operation Dragon King. This operation was intended to root out what the government declared as quote-unquote foreigners. The army began persecuting the Rohingya through widespread killing and rape. This led to a mass exodus of Rohingya, around 200,000, to Bangladesh to flee this persecution. The military government leadership or military junta claimed that the Rohingya fleeing to Bangladesh was just more proof that they were illegal. Bangladesh couldn't handle this influx of refugees, and they struck a deal with the United Nations and Burma so that most of the Rohingya refugees would be returned. And in 1982, Burma declared a new Citizenship Act. Citizenship was automatically given to people based on them being part of what they declared as quote-unquote the national race. Anyone who had come to Burma after British rule was now considered illegal. And this act applied to all of the Rohingya, despite their long history in Arakan. If they wanted to apply for citizenship, the government now needed them to prove that they had lived in Arakan since 1824. Due to poor documentation, since this would have required them to have documents from more than 100 years ago, most Rohingya were not able to come up with this proof that the government was asking for, or these documents that the government was asking for. Almost all of the Rohingya were now effectively made stateless. What this meant was that according to the government, they had no legal rights in Burma, they had no other citizenship, and no legal rights anywhere else. If some crime was committed against them, they couldn't file a report, they had no rights to own any land, they had no rights to health care, to schooling, nothing. In 1991, another 250,000 Rohingya were forced to flee to Bangladesh because of the abuse by the military. In the late 90s, 230,000 Rohingya were returned back to Burma through a repatriation agreement. In 2011, Myanmar's military junta was dissolved and a new so-called democratic government was installed. The new elected leader of Myanmar was Aung San Suu Kyi. However, under this new government, things did not get any better for the Rohingya. In 2012 and 2016, tens of thousands of Rohingya had to flee a brutal crackdown. And 2017 is when the persecution reached its highest point and all hell broke loose. Just a side point here. While the Western world likes to proudly say that democracy is the best form of government and that it guarantees equality and freedom for everyone, the case of Myanmar is one of countless examples of how this is not remotely true, especially when it comes to Muslims. While there have been many improvements for Burmese, for the Muslims and the Rohingya, there is no change in terms of the persecution and the oppression they faced. And for those who might not know, Aung San Suu Kyi was praised worldwide as being an activist for democracy and human rights. She was even arrested and was under house arrest by the military government for 15 years. She was even awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 1999, and Time magazine called her Gandhi's quote-unquote spiritual heir to nonviolence. When it comes to the Rohingya and the Muslims, however, there are no human rights being fought for. For someone who herself was under house arrest and even faced government persecution, she could not have an ounce of sympathy or empathy for Muslims. She has repeatedly denied any persecution of Muslims and the Rohingya, and she herself denied the existence of Rohingya and has called them Bengalis. Since 2017, more than 742,000 Rohingya have had to flee to Bangladesh. Attempts at repatriation agreements to get Rohingya back to Myanmar have failed. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute has been analyzing satellite images and estimates that at least 40% of Rohingya villages have been completely demolished by the violence in 2017. A BBC investigation found that some Rohingya villages had been destroyed to make way for government facilities. More than 500,000 Rohingya are still believed to be living in northern Rakhine. In January 2020, the UN International Criminal Court of Justice ordered Myanmar to protect the Rohingya. However, the army continues to deny targeting civilians and says it's only fighting quote-unquote Rohingya militants. Aung San Suu Kyi continues to deny any acts of genocide and has downplayed atrocities that occur against the Rohingya. She claims that it is intercommunal violence. In 2021, there was another military coup against Aung San Suu Kyi by Min Aung Hlaing. The coup caused the country to fall into chaos. A government in exile was formed called the National Unity Government of Myanmar. It greenlit a people's defensive war against the military junta and called on citizens to fight against what they call military terrorists in every corner of the country. Many ethnic military groups answered that call, and the Three Brotherhood Alliance was formed. This alliance was between the Arakan Army, which is a non-Muslim Rakhine group, the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, and the Ta'ang National Liberation Army. Rakhine State has become a fighting hotspot in the fight between the military and these armed groups. Both the military and the Arakan Army have been accused of abducting and forcibly recruiting over 1,000 Rohingya men and boys from villages in Rakhine and forcing them to fight. They have also been using Rohingya as human shields in their fight between themselves. Thousands more Rohingya were forced to flee to Bangladesh. Around 45,000 Rohingya fled to an area on the Naf River near the border of Bangladesh looking for protection. While the Arakan Army claims that it is fighting for more autonomy for the population of Rakhine State, they have continued abusing and oppressing the Rohingya. The Rohingya are stuck between the military and the Arakan Army, and they have no safe place to turn to between the two. And each side, the military and the Arakan Army, are blaming each other for any abuses and denying that they are doing anything against the Rohingya. There has also been a long history of resistance from the Muslims and Rohingya against the oppression they've faced. The most recent of this resistance has been by the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, originally known as Harakan al-Yaqeen. They are a group of mujahideen who formed in 2012 and 2013 in response to the violence, attacks, and the oppression against the Rohingya. They continue until today to fight for rights and freedoms of the Muslims and Rohingya, and against the violence, oppression, and massacres that have constantly and consistently been facing them for decades. While there have been many mistakes and incorrect actions committed by them in their fight, it's still important that we make dua for them and to ask Allah Azza wa Jal to keep them guided upon what is best and correct, and to grant them victory and grant victory to the mujahideen of the Arakan. Just as even with all that they're going through and suffering and persecution that they have faced, they have not forgotten to support our brothers and sisters in Palestine and Gaza. We cannot forget our brothers and sisters in Myanmar, and we have to continue to support them. This is now just a brief history of what they've been facing, and we're going to move to our next section now, where we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about the specific suffering and persecution that the Muslims and the Rohingya have been facing. We're going to start with a quote by the Deputy Immigration and Population Minister, Jaja Win. He said, and this is his quote, there is no so-called Rohingya ethnic race in Myanmar. This quote from this government official encompasses and illustrates the attitude of the Myanmar government towards the Rohingya. They have done their best to strip any humanity and dignity from the Rohingya and to devalue them as much as possible. Historically, the government has controlled information in Myanmar, and they've used this control to spread hate speech against the Rohingya and to turn the population of Myanmar against them. State-run newspapers and news channels demean the Rohingya, and as the quote I mentioned said, they deny that they even exist. As I mentioned in the first section, the government of Myanmar claims that the Rohingya are actually illegal immigrants from Bangladesh, and instead of calling them Rohingya, they call them Bengalis. And they do whatever they can to spread these claims to ordinary Burmese. We might have heard that Buddhists are very peaceful people and they are against violence and they are non-violent. And that the Buddhist religion is one of non-violence and peace towards everyone. But by looking at Myanmar and how the Buddhist majority treats the Muslims and the Rohingya, we can see that when it comes to the Muslims, this isn't true. Buddhist nationalists and monks, and even senior monks, not just fringe radical monks, continually incite racism and hatred against the Rohingya and Muslims in general. Buddhist monks hold speeches in their temples calling for violence against the Rohingya and comparing them to animals and insects. Both the government, nationalists, and Buddhist extremists used newer access to internet, cell phones, and social media as tools to amplify and spread this hate speech to reach millions of people. They use these means to spread false claims that the Rohingya are predators and they will destroy Buddhism, that they're foreigners, and they deny any atrocities committed against the Rohingya. As I mentioned, one of the ways that the government has tried to dehumanize and spread the claim that the Rohingya don't belong in Myanmar is through a citizenship law passed in 1982. This law defined who was and wasn't part of the country and stripped almost all the Rohingya of their citizenship, leaving them stateless. This leaves them without any official identification or basic rights under the law. This also allows the government to treat them in any way that they wish without any repercussions or having to face any consequences. Even after the military government fell in 2011, the so-called democratic government used the military to oppress the Rohingya, especially in Rakhine State. The military protected Buddhist monks and ultra-nationalist groups while they were actively attacking the Rohingya camps, which were already impoverished. They would burn down homes and attack any Rohingya they came across. I mentioned a few times earlier that because of the persecution and attacks, the Rohingya were forced to flee to other countries like Bangladesh, Malaysia, Thailand, and Pakistan. The violence and persecution against the Rohingya isn't something that only started or has taken place in the last 15 to 20 years. In the first section, we talked about what happened during World War II and how the Buddhist majority sided with the Japanese who invaded and the Rohingya supported the British. The British forces retreated when the Japanese invaded Burma, and this led to many Muslim Rohingya being abandoned. And because of this, they were forced to flee from Buddhist majority areas to Muslim majority areas in northern Arakan, where British still had control of the area. Unfortunately, this also led to many killing of many Rakhine Buddhists in Arakan in retaliation. When the Japanese continued to advance into Burma, the British failed to launch and hold a successful counteroffensive. This led to even more Muslims being abandoned, and this led to a rise of even more intercommunal violence and greater hostility between the Muslim Rohingya and Buddhist majority. When the Japanese advanced on Arakan, the British retreated and left behind a large number of weapons. These weapons reached the hands of Buddhists in Arakan, known as Moghs or Rakhine, and they used them to attack and terrorize the Muslim Rohingya. They killed, slaughtered, and stabbed and shot the Rohingya to such an extent that it was described that the waters of the Lemro River turned red with the blood of the innocent victims. Many Muslims tried to escape by swimming away in the river or hiding in forests, and those who tried to escape in the river were shot and killed as they were swimming away. Children were taken, thrown in the air, and stabbed by swords. Women and girls were taken by the Moghs and raped and used for their enjoyment before being killed a few days later. Many women threw themselves into the river to save their modesty and spared themselves the horror of what they would face. Villages were ransacked with all of their belongings and even their cattle being taken, and the villages were destroyed and countless Muslims were killed. It is estimated that approximately 100,000 Muslims were massacred, although the real number is most likely higher. Hundreds of Muslim villages were wiped off the face of the map. Some previously Muslim majority areas turned into Muslim minority or even in some areas, Muslim-free areas. In 2012, there was a peak in violence against the Rohingya. In early 2012, more police began to patrol Rohingya neighborhoods, and Buddhist monks started distributing magazines calling the Rohingya terrorists and saying that they would take over Rakhine state with their quote-unquote uncontrollable birth rates. The pamphlets and magazines said that the Buddhists needed to wipe out the Rohingya or that they would take over their land. By mid-2012, violence and massacres began to take place against the Rohingya. The Buddhist Rakhine used iron spears, machetes, arrows, and guns to slaughter them. They would set houses, buildings, and masajid on fire and attack the people who were running out. Riot police were even involved, shooting Rohingya who were trying to put out the fires. The largest Muslim area in a city called Sitwe was burned to the ground. Any buildings that were still standing were bulldozed days later. Approximately 10,000 people used to live there. Men, women, and children were slaughtered, with government trucks dumping dozens of bodies who had their hands tied and were covered in gunshot and stab wounds in mud flats. Many other Muslim neighborhoods were burned to the ground. Human Rights Watch even published a harsh report against the Myanmar government, accusing them of crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing. This report accused the military of firing on Rohingya protesters and even driving 100,000 people into the sea. At the time, the United Nations called the Rohingya the most persecuted group in the world. The Myanmar government used the Buddhist violence in 2012 and 2013 as an excuse to segregate the Rohingya and to keep them confined in an even smaller area. Refugees from destroyed areas were put in camps that were sealed off with barbed wire, fencing, and military checkpoints. Township and border guards even started to round up Rohingya whose homes weren't damaged or destroyed and force them into these camps. As soon as they were forced out of their homes were set on fire and destroyed. Now these camps that the Rohingya were forced into face severe restrictions, and severe restrictions are put on the Rohingya. Aside from the barbed wire fencing and the checkpoints, they are constantly threatened and harassed. They're forced to pay bribes, given curfews for when they are allowed to be outside, or even when they can have their lights on. The Muslims are not allowed to get the items that they need. They can't move freely, and they can't even get the proper food that they need. A boy from one of the camps said that most nights they would hear the sounds of torture. If any Rohingya were found outside in the evening, they would be beaten and tortured, sometimes to death, just for the act of being outside. The camps are basically just open-air prisons or concentration camps. In these camps, it's not that there just isn't any freedom to move. They don't even have freedom to breathe or space to breathe. Families of up to 13 or more are forced to share a single room. The shelters are made of sticks and branches, barely giving proper shelter from the rain. There is constant flooding, there is no clean water, and no proper medical care. There are no jobs for the adults and no education for the kids. The Rohingya are prevented from praying the salah and from calling the adhan. The Myanmar government and military do their best to destroy the Rohingya physically and mentally. The conditions are so bad in these camps that the people in them, they say that they're not even really living. They're basically just counting down the days before they die. Imagine what you would do or how you would feel if you were stuck in a small area, with restrictions on every movement, on every action. You have no ability to work, no ability to learn, no chance to learn, the worst food, and barely any or no clean water, surrounded by armed guards. There is no life and no hope in these camps. 2016 and 2017 is when the state-sanctioned violence against the Rohingya reached their all-time high. Because of the massacres and killings that happened in 2012 and what happened after, as I mentioned, in October 2016, a group of Rohingya formed a group called the Haraka al-Yaqeen to fight back against the oppression and to fight in defense of the Muslims. They attacked 3 police outposts in northern Rakhine and killed 9 police officers. In what they claimed was a response to these attacks, which was actually just a justification and excuse, the Myanmar army cracked down on the Muslims in what they called a clearance operation. They did what was done in 2012 on an even larger scale, and this time, instead of regular civilians carrying out the actions while the government just watches or the army just watched, the military themselves led this campaign. They began a systematic campaign of killing, of torture, of rape against the Rohingya, driving them out of their villages and burning the villages to the ground. I'm going to mention now just some eyewitness accounts of what happened in these villages, and these are quotes. One resident of a village, this is what he described. He said, "The military came into the village and shot indiscriminately whoever they found. Elderly and children were shot. Many people were killed." He also said, "The soldiers dragged the women from their houses by their hair. They took off the women's clothes and lungi, their sarongs. They trampled their necks. They pulled up their blouses and removed their bras. They raped them right there in the yard." I want us just to think about that. They raped and gang raped our sisters, women and girls out in the open for everybody to see. Did we know what was happening when it was going on? And if not, why weren't we aware? This was international news at the time. It's not something that was hidden, or it was something only it came out years later. At the time, it was widespread and widely reported on global media. Another account from another resident of the same village. He's in this report, they called him Jamal, 24 years old. He watched soldiers arrest Shukr, a 55-year-old man. "I saw that he was arrested by 4 soldiers. Then I saw him lying on the ground. After that, I saw them slaughter him with a knife that was about 1.5 feet long." Jawad, 23, a resident of Dargi Zar village, said that soldiers were shooting indiscriminately when they entered his village. He said, "They didn't spare the young ones. He watched from an embankment as soldiers killed his older brother and his brother's 2 children, and then tossed their bodies into a fire. The soldiers also burned crops and dispersed cultivated rice so that they couldn't be harvested. They didn't even spare the crops that they were growing, and they even shot the cows just so that they had no chance to recover afterwards." I just wanted to think about what I was just mentioned. They didn't spare the children, no matter how young they were. Not just young children, they even killed babies. Men, women, elderly, and children were slaughtered, and their bodies were either tossed into a fire or into mass graves, or just a pile of bodies, treating them, and they were treated worse than animals. Abdul, 30 years old, he fled his home in his village when soldiers entered the town and began firing their weapons. He said, "They shot at us while we were escaping from the village. Some were killed while others managed to escape." Abdul managed to make it to the outskirts of his village, and he hid on a hillside. The gunfire increased throughout the day, and he said that soldiers were beating and shooting the villagers. The next day, he watched from the hillside as soldiers in green uniforms with red shoulder patches set homes on fire and shot at people. He said, "At first, they fired at the houses with rocket launchers from some distance. When they fired, people ran away. Then they came into the villages and poured gasoline and set fire to the houses." So it was not enough just to try and destroy it one time. They had to go back and again just to make sure that they didn't leave anything. Abdullah said he watched soldiers burn a masjid. He saw them physically abuse women. And fearful of violence and not being able to escape this violence if he stayed, he fled north. He said, "We understood that we had no way to return." He traveled through several villages, but the soldiers were present at each of them until he reached an area known as Kumar Kali. There he was reunited with his wife, who told him that soldiers had slit the throat of their 4-year-old son when they were trying to flee the village. The couple then crossed by boat and fled to Bangladesh. Another testimony from another man, he said they didn't spare the young ones. They slaughtered infants with large knives and threw the bodies into large fires. Anyone who tried to stand up to the military and stop them from abusing the honor of the women and girls were beaten and killed. They were shot by soldiers and helicopters, and the villages were burned down. Many survivors said that they saw government forces coming together with the Rakhine Buddhist civilians and other non-Rohingya refugees. They would take part in looting and robbing the Rohingya homes, as well as the killings, burnings, and rape. Entire villages were burned to the ground and wiped off the face of the map. The army and police targeted masajid, schools, and businesses to destroy and burn. Rohingya were beheaded and even burned alive. Approximately 120,000 Rohingya were forced to flee their homes, and another 400,000 were trapped in conflict zones in the country. The government blocked the UN and other groups from bringing in aid and food to those trapped and investigate what was happening on the ground. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees, the UNHCR, they said that the government and military were, quote unquote, killing men, shooting them, slaughtering children, raping women, burning and looting houses, forcing these people to cross the river. Even with all of that, Aung San Suu Kyi, the leader of the government at that time, denied any ethnic cleansing and blamed what was happening on, quote unquote, terrorists and fake news. Currently, there are more than 1 million Rohingya in refugee camps all over the world, and another 500,000 fleeing for their lives. There may currently be more Rohingya outside of Myanmar than in Myanmar, and they don't have any way of coming back to their homes. Rohingya properties have been seized and stolen, with some being taken over by the government or ethnic Rakhines, and other lands sold to developers. There are so many incidents and things to mention that if we were going to mention all of it, we could be here for hours just going through each incident. And there's so many reports of and documentation of what's happening. You can just go on Google and YouTube and find all kinds of reports and incidents that have happened. Like, it would take hours to talk about all of it. So we'll stop there for now in terms of describing what's happening, and it would behoove us all to take some of our time and to learn about what's happening there, as I mentioned, to see what's going on. There's documents from the UN, from different human rights organizations, as well as from independent journalists. There's tons of reports that we can find, and testimonies, and from Rohingya themselves, some who were managed to flee to Bangladesh and other countries. And we'll move now to our next section, which is what can we do? Because it's not enough just to hear about these things and learn about these things, but we need to actually see what we can do to help our brothers and sisters. And the most important thing is to find out what's going on, to keep informed as best as we can about what is happening and what continues to happen, because it's not just something that was happening and now it's stopped. It continues to happen until today. There's countless websites and videos that we can, and articles that we can refer to and learn about, and we should do that, because if we don't know what's happening, then we can't help them. If it's all just clouded, then how can we expect to help them if we don't even know what they're facing and what their needs are? Obviously, of course, we can also give sadaqah for those who are able towards helping the Rohingya. There are hundreds of thousands of Rohingya, both in Myanmar as well as in Bangladesh, in Malaysia and Indonesia, and other countries, who are suffering from extreme poverty. As I was talking about, they are leaving with just the clothing on their back. They have nothing. All their possessions, everything they own, they had to leave it behind, and it's all destroyed. They need everything from clean water and food to clothes and basic health care and education. And if you're able to give something, then please do so. We're actually here at Dar al-Ihsan, we're able to collect and send money to some Rohingya who are in Malaysia. So if that's something that you are looking for, then we can help with that, inshallah. As I've also mentioned in previous sessions, we can also work to spread the message of what is happening to the Rohingya and Muslims of Myanmar. We can do that by talking to people that we know face to face, as well as through social media. The government and Buddhist groups in Myanmar, they want to keep the voices of the Rohingya silenced, and they want to erase their very existence. We cannot let that happen. We need to amplify their voices and make sure the whole world knows what's happening. We can also follow those sharing the truth of what is happening in Myanmar. And we can find them through Twitter, through Instagram, through YouTube. There's various people who are documenting and sharing and continuing to share what's happening. Now, some may say that what's even the point of sharing things on social media? Does it really have any effect, or does it really do anything? Some may even say that there is no point because the enemies of Islam control everything anyways, and they're just going to cover it all up. And to that, I respond with this. Why are you giving the enemies of Allah Azza wa Jal the attributes of Allah? Isn't it Allah Azza wa Jal alone who has power and control over everything and who controls everything? Why are we giving up without even trying and making excuses that the enemies of Allah have all the power anyways? Do we really think so little of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we believe that He Azza wa Jal isn't able to amplify the voices of the Muslims and make the truth heard? The Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, or the Yahud have no power except what we give them. And we need to stop having this backwards and defeatist mindset of giving the attributes and the power of Allah Azza wa Jal to the enemies of Allah. It's really a shame and a tragedy that we see today the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala having more belief in the strength and power of the Muslims than we the Muslims do. We need to think, why do the enemies of Islam try so hard and put so much effort into trying to silence our voices and trying to divide us? Why is it that whenever videos, reports, or social media posts go viral, or the enemies of Allah, they hear people speaking about what is happening, wherever it may be, whether it's in Myanmar, to the Rohingya, whether it's in Palestine, in Gaza, in East Turkestan, or elsewhere, we see them get so angry and upset. It is because they believe in the power of the Muslims, and they know that if we were to stand up strong and stand together and to speak the truth and to stand against what is wrong, we would never be defeated. They know that Allah Azza wa Jalla will never abandon us. But it is us, the Muslims, who seem to have decided that we are weak and that we have no power. We think poorly of ourselves and each other, and we think poorly of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And whenever anyone tries to come with an idea to do something, we end up sabotaging the effort before it even starts. We find that instead of looking to see how we can help, how we can be involved, how we can help to strengthen the effort, how we can contribute to the efforts, we belittle the effort of those trying, we mock them, we speak badly about them, and we make 101 excuses for why what they're doing is never going to work and that there's no point in doing it anyways. Don't we remember the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ إِنَّا لَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ مَنْ أَحْسَنَ عَمَلًا. Indeed, those who have believed and done righteous deeds, indeed, we will not allow to be lost the rewards of any who do well in deeds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that no matter how small we might consider our efforts, they will not be wasted. When we look at the stories in the Quran and the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we find a lesson being constantly repeated. We are told again and again that we should not worry about the results. Our job is only to do what is in our ability and in our power, what is in our hands, and to do whatever we can to fight for and to support the religion of Allah and the Muslims, and Allah will take care of the results. Let's stop belittling the efforts we might consider small. Let's remove this defeatist mentality from our minds. Let's not worry about what the outcome is going to be. You will even hear people saying, do you think that a few posts or a boycott is going to lead to victory and stop the persecution of the Muslims? That's not the point. We're not expecting that tomorrow we are going to go from here through a boycott and we're going to open the gates of Al-Aqsa, or we're going to free the lands of the Muslims. The point is that we have to do whatever we can to be a part of the effort that is going to lead to the victory. Are we going to be people who sit on the sidelines doing nothing but criticizing? Or are we going to be people who do something, who stand up to do whatever we can to speak up for our brothers and sisters and to help them however we can? At least then, when we stand before Allah Azza wa Jal on Yawm al-Qiyamah, we will be able to say that we did what we could, no matter how small it was. And we won't be standing there with no answer when Allah Azza wa Jal asks us what we did when we heard about what is happening to our brothers and sisters. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has guaranteed that He will give the Muslims victory. This is already set. The victory is coming. We just need to be there to help. Are we going to do something for it? It's not us, it's not Allah Azza wa Jalla who needs our help. We need Allah Azza wa Jall's help, and we will only get that help when we actually move to do something, when we actually mobilize and work towards a result. Don't we remember the words of the Prophet ﷺ when he said, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyir biyadihi, فإن لم يستطع فبلسانه فإن لم يستطع فبقلبه وذلك أضعف الإيمان." Whoever of you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. And if he's not able to do so, then let him change it with his tongue. And if he's not able to do so, then at least with his heart. And that is the weakest of faith. I don't want to hear from people saying, okay, you tell me what to do, and then I'll see if I can do it. I'm asking each of us individually to think about what we can do, to see what skills do we have. Make a plan and come to us with it, and inshallah in this markaz we will do whatever we can to help. But it is up to each of us individually to make the effort, to put in the time to do something. If you can give in charity to support the people of Myanmar and the Rohingya, then do that. If you have computer skills, see how you can apply that to help. Whatever your skills are, see how you can use them. And don't think that there's only 2 or 3 options and these are the only things that we can be done. We have to be inventive, we have to be creative, especially today with all this technology that we have. We have the internet, there's AI, there's all these social media sites, there's all these different ways that we can see people being inventive in all different areas. We also need to be inventive and creative in seeing how we can help the Muslims. Are you able to come up with a campaign to call and write letters to our MPs asking about the issue of Myanmar and the Rohingya and what the Canadian government is doing about it? Don't think anything is too small, and don't focus on the result. Don't from the beginning self-sabotage by thinking that you have to have a specific result. Just start with the effort and leave the result to Allah Azza wa Jal. And we cannot have the mentality of thinking, listen, I'm just going to sit now, I'm going to prepare in some kind of a way and wait and see, and if an opportunity comes that I can go there and do something, then I'll do something. Where is the guarantee that any of us have that we're going to get this opportunity to go and, for example, fight in jihad or go for an aid organization and volunteer on the ground somewhere? We don't have this kind of guarantee. Where is the guarantee that you're even going to live that long? From here, from today, from now, we need to start acting. We need to speak up and see what actions we can take. We need to be willing to sacrifice our time for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help our brothers and sisters. And the first step is to speak with each other in this community. In our community where we are, we need to speak to other Muslims to see how we can get together as a group, how we can mobilize, to see where our skills are, and to see what we can do. And we need to spread the message, whether it is what's happening in East Turkestan, in Myanmar, in Gaza, in Kashmir, wherever it may be. What's happening now in Azerbaijan. I don't know if people are aware of what's happening in Azerbaijan also. There's a lot of places, and we need to see how we can help them. And we need to come with ways and efforts. And finally, a reminder to turn back to the deen and to remain firm on it and to never forget our brothers and sisters in our dua. Our dua is the most important weapon that we have. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always listening and is the only one who has the power to change everything and to change any situation. It's reported from Imam Shafi'i rahmatullah ta'ala alayh that he said, the dua made at tahajjud, the night prayer, is like an arrow which does not miss its target. So let us take this opportunity. We have the opportunity every night when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descends to the lowest heaven and He is asking for those who are making dua, who is asking of me so I can give them. So let us take this time. We have every single night, the last third of the night. Let us at least once in the week, whenever we can, to take this opportunity, take this last third of the night, wake up before Fajr, even if it's just by 10 or 15 minutes, and make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to free our Muslims, Muslim brothers and sisters in Myanmar, in East Turkestan, in Gaza, in Palestine, and wherever else they may be. In Sudan, what is happening now in Sudan. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to remove the disease of defeatism from our minds and to guide us to what is best. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant victory to the mujahideen and to protect them and the Muslims being persecuted. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect the Rohingya and the Muslims in Myanmar and wherever else they may be, and make things easy for them. One thing I wanted to mention, it's not related to the situation in Myanmar now, but it's related to Dr. Afia Siddiqui. We had talked about her previously, and last December we had a program with Brother Mu'azzam Beg, where he's a brother who's very involved in her case, and he was talking about what was happening to her and the efforts that are being made to free her. So she's currently in jail in the United States in Texas, in the prison I believe is called FMC Carswell in Texas. And she was imprisoned by the United States government under accusations of terrorism, which were all false accusations. And she has a lawyer currently, his name is Clive Stafford Smith, working on her case to see how they can free her. And he's currently working on a brief that he's planning to file in the next couple of months to see if they can have her finally released after more than 20 years in jail. And one of the things that we can do is, there's an interview that he did recently. If you just Google or go on YouTube and search Clive Stafford Smith, Afia Siddiqui, or either one of the names, it should be one of the first results. And he talks about his case and how he's trying to free her and what he's looking for to how people can help. There's also a way to donate to help for her case because he's working pro bono. So if anybody's able to give for her and to help her case, then we should give. And there's one thing that each and every one of us can do, which is to write letters. So she is able to receive letters through her lawyer. The email, I believe, is lettersforafia@gmail.com. And anyone can write a letter and send it to her. And he encourages everybody to make the letter long. And he says, this is from him because he has met her and spoken with her, and he says these letters are actually a lifeline for her because she has undergone immense, tremendous torture and oppression in this prison in the United States. Actually, the prison that she's in has one of the worst records of abuses and torture in all of the prisons in the U.S. So Clive Stafford Smith, her lawyer, has said he's encouraging all of us to send letters for Dr. Afia Siddiqui and giving her some encouragement, giving her a reminder that she's not forgotten, that we still remember her and that she's being remembered. And these letters give her hope to continue to carry on. And he said that when she faces some of the torture that she faces, she ends up opening these letters and reading it out loud to the guards who are torturing her and abusing her. So I really encourage every one of us and to spread to everybody we know this message, to write a letter to Dr. Afia Siddiqui, and it will reach her. He will take the letters, print them out, and give them to her in person. And he has meetings with her coming up. So really, I encourage every one of us to write a letter to Dr. Afia Siddiqui and to send it as soon as we can so that she can get these letters and it can help her keep her sanity, basically. And let her know that she's in all of our minds and that we are continuing to remember her and make dua for her. And with that, we'll wrap up for today, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاك الله خير.